So my presentation today will focus on the psychological perspective of what constitutes a healthy relationship. So some of the questions that I'm looking to answer, or just generally have the audience or the attendees think about, is how does one define a healthy relationship and what determines a healthy relationship? And this is also taking into consideration the cultural context, as we may be dispersed all over the world, and also, what our values represent. And I speak in terms of a British South Asian, so all my ancestry line is from India. I'm a second generation in the UK, but at the same time, it's really to understand what healthy means, whilst acknowledging the culture that I'm in, or you all are in. So I will, if we just move to the next slide. Yeah, so philosophically, the philosophical stance of relationships, we look at subjectivity. Everything is subjective based on our beliefs, our values, our knowledge and ideas, and they are all created over time. So a lot of how we behave or what we believe in and what we hold value in is influenced by our immediate environments, culture and society. But kind of taking also a philosophical stance when we talk about love, and love doesn't mean in a romantic relationship, it can mean a whole number of things. The idea is that nobody can teach you love. Love you have to find yourself and within your own being. So a lot of religious scripts tell us it's by raising our consciousness or reaching the third eye. And when love comes, there is no question of responsibility. So I really like this quote: you do things because you enjoy doing them for a person you love, not out of resentment. Like I'm just thinking about gender roles in a culture, and how, let's say, for example, in an Indian culture, a woman may be more inclined to take on all the duties because that's what cultures, that's what society states, that's what families state, that's a message that's always been passed down. But that's not something that we end up enjoying. It comes with resentment. So there's a lot of kind of soul searching to be done with that too. And the next slide is just looking at more broadly, what does psychological theory tell us about healthy relationships? So there's a number of different concepts. For example, the self-construal, it's the extent to which the self is defined independently of others or interdependently with others. So again, I really bring cultural differences into this. So who am I as an individual? Where am I going as an individual? But what is my role, or where is my role within others, within my immediate setting? And then there's the relationship between the interpersonal and the intrapersonal. So the relationship you have with others, again, they all start from the immediate environment, versus the relationship you have with yourself. And, when I think about the relationship we may have with ourselves, is it a nice place in your mind, or is it a not very pleasant place? Because that's a reflection of how we interact with others. And then we've got the intrapsychic versus the intrapersonal, so which is the psyche versus the person who emerges as a social and cultural creature rather than just this sexual and biological one. And the one that I didn't add on there was also existentialism versus existential crisis. So again, that fits into psychology and philosophy. Am I living existentially? In existentialism, in that, am I living true to my values? Do I know what my values are? Or am I living in an existential crisis, which would say, I don't know what my purpose in life is. I don't know what or how I'm going to get there. And that often leads to anxiety, depression, low mood, and the other dysphoric mood states that accompany that. And then I feel that as a British Indian woman, but also from a culture where there's a lot of generational and intergenerational burdens or perhaps traumas, the psychodynamic perspective is really key to just provide some context. So in the sense that, there's three different elements to our being according to the psychodynamic perspective, but more broadly, the theory just looks at the unconscious influences our behavior and how we communicate with others. So sometimes we have very limited awareness or none at all of its occurrence. So these are our interactions with others. Human personality and abnormalities can develop from childhood, so thus influencing the way we relate to others. And again, this is quite important, sometimes to even reflect back on those really important early years and how they played a significant role in how we are today. So were there childhood needs that were not met? Were we brought up in strict households? Was there a conflict of the Western and Eastern culture? All those things, and how our parents and immediate family, we also live in multi-generational families as well. So taking into context not just our family, but what did the extended family within the environment, how did they influence how we relate to others during childhood? And that's probably how we relate now. So we're also motivated by social interests, and our primary life's problems are social ones, strangely, or should I say strangely, or, is it surprising? So social environments express our subjectivities in one's consciousness of having something in common with others towards a betterment of society. So looking at the psychodynamic more specifically, which is on the next slide, it's looking at the conscious, the pre-conscious, and the unconscious. So you can see from that the picture there that the conscious is something that we are aware of at the time, but it only represents the tip of the iceberg. So then we move into the pre-conscious state. So that's where there's the ego and parts of the superego. And this is basically saying, in a situation, most of our thoughts and ideas are not accessible to us, but that could just be how we are living with our lives as well. We may not have access to why we are the way we are. And then we move lower, which is even in more depth, is the unconscious. So this part of our mind is completely inaccessible, and we're not aware of what's going on there. And just to also say that if someone does go to psychodynamic or use a psychodynamic approach in therapy, you could be in therapy for quite a long time before you even touch the pre-conscious. So that's just something that it's just to remain mindful of. And then on the next slide, we're looking at a systemic perspective. I do feel that the systemic theory is really important to how, again, the way we live, the way we relate to others, and it's a great complement to the psychodynamic theory as well. So the key elements of using a systemic perspective, or being more systemically thinking, would be to maintain a level of neutrality and curiosity. So, for example, when we are in a situation, it's very difficult to be neutral when we feel that someone's saying some horrible things to us, or if we may have been rejected from a job. But this perspective says, actually, be quite curious about it. How was I presenting? What was going on in my environment? I'm an individual, but I'm governed by a lot of different systems. So the microsystem is micro and mesosystems are our immediate families, and the thoughts and processes that go around that. And then we've got our school, teaching, education. So as we go up, and then, in the macro system is the good laws that we abide to, or religious stances that we may abide to. So you can see that it can be a top-down process or a or very difficult to be a bottom up, and we're trying to aim for the bottom up. So if we as the individual understand where we stand, it can really move and shift us from the why I've got this problem, and be able to explore it in attempt to directly or really rapidly change the direction in which a relationship is consistently engaged in a negative feedback loop. So a negative feedback loop may look like, I don't know, perhaps arguing with our parents. They might say that we don't help them clean up. And we might say, actually, you nag me so much, that's why I don't want to do it. So you can see how it ends up in a negative cycle of a feedback loop. So the idea is to step back, remain neutral and curious. And then on the next slide, just thinking about family relationships within the systemic perspective. So family systems are complex systems, but they aren't systems in isolation. They all play a role. So I'm just thinking about the modern way of living. We might not be living with our parents after marriage, for example, or with in-laws. However, we are a product of that childhood environment. So we still bring those thoughts, those values into our marriage, and then a new respect, and then our own family. So as Chamberlain says, changes occur in self-organizing systems when the buildup of system energy propels the system towards disruption, disorder, and confusion and irregularity. So basically, in a nutshell, saying if we don't understand our systems and what's going on in there, it's going to bring up a lot of confusion. It's going to bring up really, really, dysphoric mood states as well. And on the next slide, we're looking at just more broadly now, moving away from the psychological and the philosophical perspective, just the role of media and social media in perceived healthy relationships. So, just thinking about, and this is some of my work I do with behavioral addictions. So just sometimes thinking about how does the media influence the way we view our relationships. And as it is Valentine's Day today, I'm just thinking about the unrealistic expectations that come with what perceived love looks like. And there have been many studies, I haven't referenced them here right now, but if anyone does need the reference, please feel free to contact me. There have been many psychological studies that have shown links to depression, low mood, low self-esteem, making daily life seem less interesting because there's this huge disconnect from the current environment. So, even just the Buddhist concept or even any religious, it's kind of being in the present moment. And social media has this way of just taking it away from us. So, and then there's that whole social comparison as well. Oh, why did I not get those nice flowers? But that woman on social media did for Valentine's Day. So that social comparison, it's one's own negative cognitive biases. And just generally, I was just thinking as well about Bollywood and Hollywood and how cultural and social filters on how relationships should be experienced. This idea that you're going to get swept away, or, that, what family is everything, and, but they don't always identify the complexities that come with that, and how generational changes play a key role in that too. And I'm also, the other thing about Bollywood, I was just thinking as well about the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law relationship. They almost filter what that relationship should look like. And it seems like people just follow that. Whether you're in India, whether you're in a Western country, as an Indian, there's almost this expectation that a mother-in-law is going to be horrible to a daughter-in-law. And I always wonder how much of that is influenced by media. And on the next slide, just thinking about boundaries, there's a lot of literature out there not always accessible and not always easy to follow. Some of the stuff that I've outlined here is psychodynamic, but I suppose that's because in psychodynamic practice, boundaries are essential, especially if someone's going to be in therapy for a very, very long time. So there's the work of Hartman, who outlines thick and thin boundaries. While it's not an easy read, it is quite helpful to just have it in the back, just to consider what boundaries may look like for you in your own personal life, and how that may be embedded into values, and that could go into your career. How are you maintaining boundaries with other people now that you know what boundaries are? Because we instinctively assume we know what they are, but the concept is rarely defined. So I definitely encourage to find your own definition from that. So in for example, it might be just learning to say no when you know that it's going to lead to resentment. So if you've spent more time on the phone to somebody dealing with some of their problems and haven't left any time for yourself, that can often lead to resentment, and that can play out in our environment. But actually, if we go back to that situation, we didn't set the boundary to begin with. And it's also this, it's a boundary is a soul's wish to take care of yourself. So we do want to take care of ourselves, but then also, again, society tells us it's selfish, but it's selfless to take care of family and not yourself. But actually, pouring out of an empty cup, we're not going to be helpful to anybody. But again, like I said, there's no right or wrong way to implement boundaries. But it's definitely worth thinking. It's definitely worth thinking about, especially when it can influence how we conduct our jobs, what career path we take, what how we may relate to others in educational settings. So I definitely recommend taking those into consideration. And then on the next slide, I'm just also, I'm an advocate of practice, not perfection. The more we practice, the easier certain things become, but the hardest part is starting. And self-care and self-compassion is not something that's taught to us. We're very much taught to be ashamed of ourselves, or we're very much told to live by a certain value, and the key part being told to live, not shown how to live. So that's where the narrative changes for me. For example, with my own children, if I'm self-caring and if I'm self-compassionate and I forgive myself for things that I've done that weren't right at the time, then my children don't need to learn that, because they see me doing it. And with that also comes defining what self-care is for you. So a pamper day it could constitute as self-care, but I would see it something more like just starting with 3 minutes and affirming yourself, starting the day by affirming yourself with small bits that you to include, like meditation. That's something I'm still learning myself. I've got 2 very small children, so I'm usually woken up by my children as opposed to waking up early myself. Really, really taking care of yourself in a way that you are your priority. Accountability, so being accountable for our own actions and acknowledging our own roles, so in toxicity, so whether they're good relationships and bad relationships. So it's quite easy to say so and so said this to me, or so and so said that, but actually, again, neutrality and curiosity, it would say, actually, I think this is what I did here, how can I reflect on that? Making yourself a priority. Values-based living. A few of my colleagues do a lot of work around this and have very much encouraged a values-based living. But also, I thought this was quite useful. Our love languages. What are our love languages? And if we know what our own love language is, then we know what we would need from another person. And this doesn't mean in a marriage, it doesn't mean in a romantic relationship, but definitely in a number of other settings, in, you know, how we relate to others, our parents, maybe asking them to understand what a love language is as well.